Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for being here today to listen to my speech. The topic of my speech today is Africa, the image of Africa in the media. So we're going to talk about the image of Africa in the Western media. But before we start, I will give you guys the opportunity to introduce yourself. Let's start at the extreme right.
My name is Jean-Marie Nebor.
Gaston, I'm a volunteer.
Marie-Cécile, volunteer.
My name is Marie-Louise Nebor.
Augustine, volunteer.
Thank you very much, guys, to be here today. So, as I said, the topic I'm going to have a speech about today is the image of Africa in the media. Africa is a big continent. Africa has about 52 countries. But when you go to Africa, Africa is a very diverse place. We have different religions, different races, different language, different culture, and different values. But more often, when it is talked about Africa, it is talked about Africa as if Africa was a single country with a unicity of everything. Why so? Does this image reflect exactly what Africa is? Or is Africa different? That's what I'm going to talk about today. Africa, when presented in the media, especially in the Western world, lack relativity. It seems like there's no interest to know about the depth of Africa. I'm taking for an instance, when you go to Northern Africa is populated by Arabs, and those Arabs are Muslim. Those Arabs came from the Middle East short before the birth of Jesus and invade the Northern Africa. Now, when you go deep in the southern part of Africa, especially in a country like South Africa, you see population like the Zulu. The Zulu, most of them have African religions. They're neither Christian nor Muslim, and they're all black, living in that area for a very long time. They're totally different from the people that we meet in Northern Africa who are Arabs. Now, when we go in the center of Africa, in countries such as Cameroon, Nigeria, Chad, people are either Christians or Muslim. But although they're Muslim, like people from Northern Africa, they're still originally from Africa. They have some difference in their culture compared to the people in Northern Africa. But when it is talked about Africa in the media, it's talked about Africa as if everybody in Africa were the same, acting the same way, believing in the same religion, having the same language and everything. Even the language is totally different. In Northern Africa, people mainly speak Arabic. In Sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of people speak languages they inherit from colonialism. For example, they speak French or they speak English, some speak Spanish and other Portuguese. And when you go to the eastern part of Africa, most people speak Swahili. Swahili is an original African language. But this is barely here in the media when talking about Africa. Africa is also presented in the media as a very poor continent, as a continent in need, as a continent that really lacks everything. Dr. Rod Chavez, in his article, Africa in the Western Media, published in 2007, said, quote, "What do negative image conveyed by the Western media about Africa communicate? What darkness prevail in the mind of producers? What gain for whom derive from journalistic bombast and unmitigated stereotype of a whole continent? Nouns and adjectives like hot, dark, tribe, King Kong, tribalism, primitive, nomad, animism, jungle, cannibal, savage, underdeveloped, third world, developing, etc. are yet pervasive when Africa is the story." What does Dr. Chavez mean? It means that whenever Africa is presented in the media, it is only presented a negative way, absolutely a negative way. Does the negative way reflect the reality of Africa? It is not always the case. Now, let's talk about the aspect of Africa that is mainly ignored when presented in the media. Africa, the contribution of Africa, of human, to the human history is almost zero when talking about Africa. A lot of people know about Africa starting from slavery. When black was raped, or how will I put it, stolen from Africa and brought to America to work in the cotton fields. But what a lot of people don't know is that Africa existed thousands of years before slavery. And Africa actually built the very first great civilization, and that was in Egypt. A lot of people talk about Africa as if Africa never had a religion, like the only religion in Africa or the only belief is Christianism or Islam. And this is not true, because Islam and Christianism even have their base in Africa. There has been a religion in Egypt. There has been Messiah in Egypt long before Jesus, long before Muhammad. But there is no mention when talking about Africa. And Dr. Edmund Zah Bagblaw, in his article titled Africa's Contribution to the Contemporary Western Civilization, published in 2003, said, quote, before the Roman Empire left North Africa in the 4th century, Ghana was already a powerful nation. Various countries in Europe were dependent on import of gold before the discovery of America. The civilization of Ghana was advanced to such a level that a system of taxation was imposed on every load of gold entering and leaving the empire. Trading, therefore, was a highly organized system which the wealth and importance of Ghana was based. So from this statement, we now see another aspect of Africa that is barely shown in the media. In the media, it is often talked about African before colonization as if Africans were primitive. I feel Africans were living in the bush. I feel Africans didn't have no organized society. But we realize here that the empire like Ghana, and this was short in the Middle Age, were having trade with the Western world, were so organized that they even have a taxation system. But it is barely here in the media nowadays. So now, why does the media choose not to mention this aspect of Africa? They only mention one aspect of Africa that is exclusively negative. So we are going to talk about the possible reason why the media don't talk about Africa as a whole, but only an aspect of Africa. The first reason will be the lack of economical interest. We know that everything is done in the capitalism world just because of a profit. But displaying a positive image of Africa will benefit to nobody. They need to present a negative image of Africa so that people continue to feel the need to assist Africa and feel a little comfortable. The second reason will be the fear of competition. As long as the competition is coming exclusively from China and India, it is okay. If we have to add Africa as a competitor to the Western world, to the capitalism world, it will be another problem. That's why they don't mention Africa the positive way. And the third reason will be the inability of Africans themselves to compete in the world of image. We know that nowadays, image is everything. People believe in what they see in images. But Africa does not have a media system that allows the continent to go all over the world and display another image that is different from what we've seen in the Western media. And the last reason that we're going to talk about is the will to hide the exploitation of Africa by corporation. And as we get there, I will go to Dr. Shahid Mohammed and Dr. Brian Mohammed in their article called The Exploitation of Africa's Land and People, published in 2009. In this article they say, while images of Africa poverty and disease are regularly shown in Western media, the corporations responsible for the continuous exploitation of the land's mineral and human resources, resulting in Africa's dreadful condition, see the world's largest continent as the land of opportunity. What does this mean? This means that the media, they rather talk about the negative aspect of Africa. But in the meantime, Africa is almost the provider, because most of the mineral resources that feed the Western industry come from Africa, but it is barely never talked about. Alright, so at this point, we are coming to the conclusion of the speech about the image of Africa in the Western media. And we just realized in the course of the speech that the image of Africa shown in the media is often negative, although Africans have some positive aspects, and that there's a main reason why this negative image of Africa is shown in the media. But in reality, Africa is quite different from what we see in the media. At this point, we finish with the speech, and I thank you so very much for listening to me.